So, welcome everyone to the Canadian Ecopsychology Network monthly virtual gathering. Hello, my name is Carol Koziel, and I'm the founder of CEN. Today, we're going to hear from Nevin in British Columbia about his new book, Nature-Based Therapy. But first, a little bit about Nevin. Dr. Nevin Harper is an associate professor in the School of Child and Youth Care at the University of Victoria, founder of the Canadian Adventure Therapy Symposium, and is finally completed his clinical supervised hours to register as a clinical counselor. His presentation will briefly cover the rationale for the new book, Nature-Based Therapy, the basic premises of nature-based therapy, and hopefully stimulate dialogue on outdoor therapies in general. Nevin, did I miss anything? Is there anything else our viewers should know about you?
I don't know. I don't stay with institutions or organizations very long because I get bored. I'm a bit like a squirrel looking for shiny objects. So I could have added a number of other things, but I don't think they're that necessary to cover right now.
Super. Well, thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your wisdom with us today. And Nevin, I'm going to turn the airwaves over to you.
Okay. Let's see. Can you confirm that I'm sharing the first slide of my PowerPoint?
If you hit play from start, I think you'll be good. Perfect.
Is it up?
Yep.
Okay. So not usually my style, but I'm actually not accustomed to this format. And so I actually printed notes, and I will be doing a fair bit of reading rather than just my usual style, which is presenting from the hip. I'm not very good with time though, so I felt this ordered process might be better for this this format. So I'd first like to thank Carol and the network for inviting me for this opportunity to talk about our book. I have to thank Dave Siegel and Catherine Rose, my co-authors, who I've known for years, to recognize their practice work for the last decade that we based a lot of the book on, plus the past 20 years of our collective work together. And also acknowledge that I'm working, living, and playing in the Cowichan territory, which is on the coast, our Indigenous traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples. So you've given a bit of a background for me, Carol. I would also like to add maybe that I have been in the outdoor adventure leadership field for more than 25 years now. Most of my work has been with people in need, and primarily with youth. So I worked in programs with young offenders for more than a decade, and leading wilderness expeditions generally of a month in length. So youth counselor, wilderness guide, somewhere between those two, that's been the essence of my career. And so my research is in that area, my consulting is in that area. In the university and colleges settings, I've also led trips for young adults, and the picture on the right is a high altitude field school that I ran in South America in the Andes in Bolivia, and the last trip I ran there was in 2016. So my formal guiding career has just formally ended, and one of the biggest lessons I think I take away from the work that I've done is that we don't need to go out far away to remote places on large expeditions to create the type of change that we see and would like to see for the young people that we work with. And so my PhD studies were more looking at integral systems and family systems approaches to the work. And since I finished my PhD in 2007, the majority of my work has been trying to shift therapeutic practice from working with individuals to working with groups, families, communities, as well as moving from inside to out. I would also like to, before I launch into this, acknowledge that there's so many that have come before us. What we're writing is not new. We've built our work on the previous work of many others. I mean, it's, you know, it's an honor to have people coming and listening to what we're saying, but to have Linda sitting there listening to me is a little bit odd, considering that, you know, there was a portion of my work that was built on hers. So I feel like all we're doing is continuing the work rather than creating something new or innovative. And our bottom line is really the shift in practice from indoors to out. And we've met many people who've been excited about it. We've met many people who've been resistant to the idea. Some of the strongest limitations to the practice have come from counselors and not clients, who themselves aren't willing to make the shift because of reasons X, Y, and Z. So I will carry on. So our intention in writing this book was to share ideas about the significant potential of these approaches to healing, and hopefully to inspire professionals across practices, educational, therapeutic, those who are working with children, youth, and families. We're not promoting uncritical universal claims such as nature is good for everyone or nature is healing. We do not ignore the fact that nature is a place where one can get a painful sunburn or become lost or scared. And so describing nature for healing is not to suggest it as a panacea. In essence, we are all nature. There is an issue. The Oxford Dictionary and Wikipedia still define nature as other than human. These definitions perpetuate the belief that nature is just the physical world of plants, animals, and the features of the earth, such as beaches, mountains, and rivers. This definition dichotomizes our relationship with nature, that nature is other than human. Our book, in essence, was attempting to address that, to take the work of others in ecopsychology, in counseling practices, and in outdoor adventure therapy, therapeutic outdoor practices, and to try to package it in a way that met the needs of the counselor that's just simply interested in trying it. We're not advancing or suggesting a new modality here. We're simply suggesting that there was a need, or as the academic would say, a gap in the literature around specifically providing these materials for people who work with children, youth, and families. There's plenty written that suggests or provides information for one-on-one work, for group work, but not specifically for children, youth, and families. So that the book could be used by anyone for any population or client group. However, our focus was specifically the work that we do, which is with families in essence. Okay, so why write a book? What are some of the issues? Many of you may already know these realities, but we live in a risk-averse society. It's one that attempts to protect, predict, and control negative events. Our practice and the way that we see risk is as a developmental need. We believe that, in essence, this is something that is necessary for all children, youth, and individuals to have as part of their lives. We do recognize, though, that for many, there is already too much risk in their lives, for those that are marginalized, those that live in unfavorable conditions. So this is also something that's addressing more of a modern Western middle to upper class problem in terms of nature disconnect, and some of the language that's used around that we've seen in mainstream media as well. So there are some other major issues that demand our attention. Traffic and stranger danger are two of the most commonly cited issues for children not playing outdoors. And yet, when you look at the research, these are actually very, very minimal hazards that often, when they do happen, are exploited by media and blown out of proportion. There was a recent United States study looking at unstructured playtime in children, and I'm just going to read a quote from this study. Children now have less outdoor unstructured playtime than maximum security inmates in jail who get 2 hours outdoor unstructured recreation daily. That's a bit troubling. That's one of our drivers. Technology and urbanization. I think North American studies were showing that more than 80% of North Americans now live in what would be considered urbanized settings, cities essentially. Canadian study from a few years back, Canadians spend 90% of their days indoors, another 5% in their car. That's about 20 minutes a day outdoors. it's an average. It's a national average. And we think as Canadians that we're outdoorsy people, all you have to do is track your own movements for a couple of days, and you'll probably find that it's fairly close to this. Our children are spending 50 plus hours on screens each week. And we're living in a time of unprecedented environmental degradation, species loss, erratic changes in weather. As I said earlier, what we're experiencing here on the island right now. And we cannot deny that environmental health has direct links to our mental health, and that life in the built, quote unquote, built environment is the new normal, and that our lives are driven by technology. Mental health issues, we've got about 20% of young people in Canada that are diagnosed with mood or behavior disorders such as depression or anxiety. These are the two most common things we're seeing in our practice with children and youth. Also, the reporting for these mental health issues is generally lower. There's still a lot of stigma attached to mental health. And then there's also a lot of youth that are operating at what would be considered sub-threshold symptoms, and thereby they're not meeting the criteria, excuse me, for diagnosis. And as of 2019, suicide is now the second leading cause of death among 10 to 24-year-olds in Canada. And we still have about 1 in 5 youth not getting the mental health services that they need. And we know that finding help is not easy. We know that matching the service to the individual is also a very difficult proposition at times. And what we believe is that our approach in this idea of nature-based therapy is less stigmatizing. There's higher levels of engagement. Our participants, our clients tend to adhere, and they have greater accessibility. When we work in nearby nature, we work in a favorite local park or a walk to the beach or even just in the backyard. And if we're using the practice of being outdoors in relationship with nature, then that becomes a resource. And if that resource is local, then we're providing in-house or just out-of-house, supports for our clients. And it's not just the time they spend with us in our offices. So I titled this slide Competing Ideas, and I think just as I'm looking at my notes, I think maybe that's an inappropriate word, but there has been an accelerated growth of some other literature in the last couple of years. So I'm going to put 3 up here. Forest therapy and forest bathing has quickly become popularized in the mainstream media. We're happy with the response to these developments, coming primarily out of Japan and Korea, although there are other nations doing similar work. There's a significant body of evidence to build support, so much so that in Korea and Japan, there's nationally government-funded programs for health therapy and even forest conservation linked to humans connecting with nature. There's a chapter being written for an edited text that we're working on by a colleague in Korea, where he outlines all of the changes that have come from the forest bathing and forest therapy movement in Korea. And it's exceptional. The amount of research that's been done and the amount of governmental funded, supported development is unprecedented. And it's an absolute model to learn from. So the Japanese term Shinrin-yoku, or the Korean term Sanlimyeok, means loosely forest bathing. What we've seen in the literature is it's just caught fire. And I recently found, I think, 19 titles since 2018, and I'm going to put them up here. This is what's happened since we got our contract to write our book. These have all been published. And again, it's not to decry the work, that it's distracting. It's amazing. I love the fact that this many people are excited about it. I think the language of forest bathing, forest therapy is attractive, and it's worked, and there's a movement attached to it. The issue that we have is with the terms therapy, and they now have developed also a training institute which is using the term guides. So they're training guides for forest therapy. And I think the use of those two terms, therapy and guide, in the way that I use those terms, therapy in a clinical perspective and guide as in being responsible for the health and safety of others, I think is maybe a little bit potentially misleading for people that are looking for therapy or are in need of therapy. So again, this is helpful. This is a great movement. I'm excited about it. I'm supportive of it, but I just caution, because our work has already been pulled in. Oh, is that just forest bathing? Oh, is that just forest therapy? Our work is actually trying to help clinicians who are already registered and qualified in their own professional worlds to move out of the office. What forest bathing, and I've been through about 3 of these books so far, is mindfulness, nature connection activities, and it's awesome. So it's good, but it's also not what we're doing. There may be questions later, so I'll leave it at that for now. So commonly asked, does it work? There's a couple mainstream books out there, and I think it was March or May, Outside Magazine. These are the folks that write the bestsellers. They're attractive covers, they're marketed well, and they've done a great job of personalizing stories and making these research studies really accessible and fun to read. So yes, there is lots of evidence out there. I'm going to give you a brief snapshot because I'm a researcher. I feel it necessary to actually show some of those research studies that these books are based on. And this Outside Magazine, I say a bit tongue-in-cheek, science's new miracle drug is free. I think each of those words is problematic. Actually, I could problematize all of those words, except maybe I'll give is a pass because that's not as controversial in my mind. But to the research. My image of all of you is now covering my slide and I can't read. There we go. So cognition and affect. People feel better. People with depression in clinical studies have said they feel better, they can think more clearly when they spend time in nature. And now my slides are not working. There we go. Learning. When the body is involved in learning, when there is active engagement in the learning process, there's been improvements, and that's with the environment. So outdoor learning is active. Just actually having exposure to nature, which, you know, for me, I'm looking outside, I've got 3 windows, I can see trees and snow and very, very few built man-made things. And I feel good about this office space rather than working at my office at the university. These things we know. And I'm sure there's a very biased listener on this webinar. I'm sure that this is all fairly acceptable and you're probably already aware of this. Our Korean and Japanese researchers, a lot of their research has been around health markers, actual measurable physiological and chemical changes within the body. Immune function is one of them. Cancer fighting, phytocides coming off the trees from the essential oils. There's a lot of wonderful research coming on that front. The activity part of it, we use a lot of physical activity in our activities and games and interventions. So repeated exercise improves well-being. And here's a systematic review that was done a couple years ago from Scandinavia that had said a small but reliable evidence base supports the effectiveness and appropriateness of nature-assisted therapy. That was the term that they chose to use, nature-assisted therapies, but they were drawing on research from adventure therapy, wilderness therapy, garden therapy, all forms of outdoor therapies, which was wonderful to see. So what is this? What is nature-based therapy? This is the question that is a little bit hard for me to answer, considering that we're not proposing an actual modality. But what I can suggest is that it is something that we can describe in terms of practice pieces. So outdoors. Our work is primarily outdoors, but not always. It is generally nearby rather than location or destination focused. We have some beautiful parks and beaches in our area, but we don't necessarily use those with our clients unless they have easy access to them. If they're limited by transportation, limited by finances, we can ask about and research what are the local nooks and crannies in their neighborhoods where there's a forested stream that runs through a community, where there's a pocket of wild space or wetlands where there's birds gathering. So we seek out those natural areas that are nearby the homes of our clients. One of the selling pieces for practitioners is that you don't need an office. That said, there are times when weather and other things dictate, and potentially the conversations that need to be had that will dictate the use of an indoor space. Second, adventure. The three of us that wrote this book come from an adventure therapy background. We believe in our experiential approaches. We like our clients to be active and engaged in their bodies. And we also work with the elements of risk and challenge at an appropriate and timely and intentional way, in a timely, intentional way. So we're not just taking risks for the sake of risk. Our practice is relational in that nature, the client, and the therapist build relationships. It's not just a triad. There's individual dyadic relationships, which starts with the therapist having a relationship with nature and building their own ecological literacy. Their own ecological self becomes a driver to bring others into that relationship, and then the client can build their relationship with nature. Our practice is neurobiological. We too are getting excited about research coming out around advanced understanding of the autonomic nervous system, how we can use healthy, safe social engagement and elements of risk at the same time to assist in the development of self and co-regulation, especially in our younger clients. Polyvagal theory is thrown around very often, and I try to explain it to my students as best as I can, but I tend to defer to others for that because it's a little too scientific for Nevin. But I do understand what it feels like in practice. I do know when social engagement or connectiveness has been lost with clients, and we can use nature-based and connection activities to regain that sense of social connection and relationship, and then also enter back into activities that may incorporate a little bit of risk and challenge, so that the autonomic nervous system is actually firing, but firing in a safe place, so that the young person or the family member can understand that I can deal with this, I have the resources and capacity, and this is what it feels like to take risks when I'm socially engaged. And we hope that those can then transfer back into family, community, and school and other places. Obviously, there's a physiological dimension to nature-based therapy. Our bodies actually acclimatize to spending time outdoors. Just because it snows or rains doesn't mean we do indoor sessions. We adjust, we adapt, we spend time outdoors, and sometimes we even take on challenges, whether that's inclement weather or more difficult topography, to work with the client's needs. You know, a 16-year-old with a lot of energy might actually benefit from a very steep hike up one of the local hills to a viewpoint where metaphorically we might be working on what their future holds, which of course then sitting at a height of land provides you with an opportunity to see farther. And we work with those metaphors and play with those, driven by the client's insights, to work outdoors. And then last, and I won't go deeply into this, but obviously there's a spiritual and cultural potential with nature-based and outdoor activities. Most people internationally from around the world were earth-based in some ways. Most Europeans came from pagan roots, which the rise of Christianity, you know, kind of cut that back and separated, and that may have been that start of our environmental degradation that put us in the place that we're in now. So it is not a specific modality. Nature-based therapy is not something that we want to see trademarked and stamped in terms of this is a particular approach. We don't want the APA to recognize it as the 564th version of therapy out there that has training models. But we do have an interest in blending others' practices with the ideas of nature-based therapy. So one of the things I mentioned earlier, it's not going to be for every practitioner. If a practitioner doesn't have or hasn't developed a sense of ecological self or a relationship with nature, it may be difficult to enter into the practice. And so our first recommendation is develop self and nature. Build your own nature connection, build your own relationships with the environments, learn about the parks, learn about, in our case, in North America at least, learn about the indigenous stories of the territory, learn about the colonial settler stories of the territory, truly understand the history, the narrative. Where were the special places? Where were the sacred spaces? Where were people gathering? And learn about these so that you then can also bring your clients into those spaces in an informed way and not just going for hikes. And this is what takes nature-based therapy beyond just the walk and talk approach to therapy. Nature is co-therapist. We're pretty clear in our book that nature is not a resource. It is not something to be used, but in effect to build a relationship with. If it's built effectively, some of our work, some of the stuff that comes from our mouths is a lot less impactful and a lot less important than the relationship that the client can build with nature. Covered this already, but the idea that we get involved, we're engaged, we are big advocates for play. We use a lot of experiential activities that get families and kids playing together and developing a rich social engagement as a family. Some families would question that doesn't look a lot like therapy, and we say, what is therapy, right? Because if you feel better about being together and can communicate and have fun together out here, we would encourage you to do that when things aren't going so well. So family enrichment through recreation is actually a significant part of our approach. Restorative, there's a lot of research around the restorative properties of just being in nature. It's inherently therapeutic. The work with self-regulation is obviously a big part of our work. We've got an entire chapter focused on that. And then bonding and belonging, and that's both within the family system as well as with nature and community. Again, our interests in writing the book were to shift the ideas of one-on-one indoor therapy to why not the whole family system outdoors? And that's the two extremes, but that is in essence what we were pushing for. Theory, I'm not going to go deep into this, but I'll share three of the primary theories that we look at in our work, and we explain them more in the book. This idea of theory of affordances, it's a learning theory, and it's essentially humans' relationship to objects and spaces and how we adapt within them. And we choose our outdoor spaces very, very intentionally. This is an image, of a manufactured bridge across a stream that wouldn't interfere with the flow of the creek or river. But we do often find ourselves stepping over creeks. We may return to a creek when there's a higher flow because it increases the risk of someone getting a wet foot. And again, we play with the ideas of risk, but we're not talking about dangling people off rock cliffs. Our version of nature-based therapy is without technical equipment or technical knowledge. So we're stepping away from the adventure therapy folks that might be kayaking and rock climbing, and we're actually just stepping on rocks to get across a creek, right? So the theory of affordances provides us with a theoretical framework for picking spaces and places based on the needs of our clients at that time. Commonly cited in the literature is attention restoration theory. There's four main constructs that we work with attention restoration. The first is just being away, being out of the ordinary, an indoor space, fairly standard experience. So to be in an unique outdoor space is away. It's away from your regular practice, your regular routines, the stress of your work, family, school. Second construct, soft fascination. If you stare into the heart of that image, you're experiencing soft fascination. It's when your mind relaxes, your directed attention is dropped, and it happens when we're in natural environments. The babbling brook that you sit beside, the stream, sunsets, sunrises, it's that sensation of losing focus and just feeling like you're a part of something. Compatibility is the third construct in attention restoration theory. We have to choose environments that are appropriate for our clients. We had a bit of a mishap in the city of Calgary once. We were trying to promote Outward Bound programs for new Canadians. We got funding from Parks Canada. we were at a Boys and Girls Club. We were talking to these new Canadians. They were immigrants from different parts of the Middle East and Africa. And when we described the program to them, we had one young youth say, "So you want me to put all of my belongings in a bag, carry them on my back into a harsh outdoor environment, and to cook over a small fire and live under a tarp? Do you know where I've been for the last 2 years? In a refugee camp, where I had to put all of my belongings in a bag, carry them on my back, etc." So compatibility of the environment to the needs of the client is very important to look at. The fourth element is extent. Extent is most easily expressed viscerally in the body when you see a sprinter winning a 100-meter dash or a mountaineer standing on the top of a mountain. When you see this, one is physically extending their body out into an open space because they feel like they are a part of something greater than themselves. This is an evolutionary practice. It's in us. It feels good. And some environments create that feeling. So we try to recreate experiences, and we try to designate areas that we can go to so students, I'm back in my university mode, clients can feel like they are a part of something greater than themselves. It's a very powerful experience. Oh, go figure, ecopsychology. We often misusing this in theoretical terms, and I think it's a little bit loose as a study, ecopsychology, to use it as a term in terms of theory. But if we don't acknowledge human health and environmental health and the relationship between those two, we're completely missing the point. And so in our trainings, we are talking to therapists about ecopsychology, about the literature of ecopsychology, referencing previous works, Linda and others' books that folks can go to and learn more about, and sort of to expand their knowledge that this isn't just me counseling outdoors, that there's a lot going on here. It may be the most holistic, well-rounded approach to therapy, and it's probably one, in my experience, where clients have said, this doesn't feel like any therapy I've ever been to before. So ecopsychology has definitely driven that in our practice. So this is just a snapshot of what was covered in the book. If you want to know more about the book, here's my stump. You got to buy it and read it. But again, I said this to a few folks before we started. We built our book on the backs and the work of others who have come before us. A lot of what we wrote about is just the way that we've developed our practice based on influences from ecopsychology, outdoor and adventure therapy, regular mainstream counseling and therapeutic practice, social work, and we've pulled it all together. The three of us as co-authors all did our terminal degrees. Dave and Katie, both in their masters, looked at family-level adventure-based work, and my PhD was in family-based wilderness therapy. So we really are strong advocates for larger system interventions and outdoor practice. That's it, I think. I'm gonna leave it there. Carol, I probably went over time. I'm not good with time.